In the heart of Manhattan, where glass towers pierced the sky and wealth hung heavy in the air, Daniel Harper had everything a man could buy. A penthouse sprawling across the top floor of a Fifth Avenue skyscraper, a tech empire that hummed with millions, and a name that opened doors before he even knocked. But at 38, Daniel carried a weight no bank account could lift, a heart hardened by betrayal, a life shadowed by loss. Across the polished marble floors of his silent empire, Lila Torres had nothing but her quiet strength, her calloused hands, and a secret she never meant for him to see. One restless evening, under the glow of a city that never slept, everything changed. Suspicious, Daniel decided to follow his housekeeper after work. What he uncovered would unravel his world and hers forever. Sit back, sink into this story, and let it carry you through the streets of New York, where the richest hearts hide in the most unexpected corners. It was 6:12 p.m., and the October sun dipped low, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of amber and steel. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, Daniel Harper watched the city pulse below, taxis honking, pedestrians weaving, street vendors shouting over the din. A cool breeze slipped through the cracked balcony door, but inside Daniel, the air felt heavy, restless. He leaned against the glass, his sharp gray eyes narrowing as he spotted Lila Torres hurrying down the steps of his building, two plastic grocery bags swinging in her hands. Lila, his housekeeper of 8 months, was a puzzle he hadn't bothered to solve until now. She was 27, with dark hair tied back in a practical bun, her movements always precise, her presence almost invisible. She cleaned his 5-bedroom penthouse with a quiet efficiency, polishing countertops, folding linens, watering the potted orchids by the foyer. But lately, Daniel had noticed things. She left early some evenings, always with an excuse about her sick mother. She took hushed phone calls in Spanish, her voice low and urgent, words he couldn't catch. And those bags, always those bags, full but never explained. Lila. "Hold on," he called from the balcony, his voice calm but edged with curiosity. She froze mid-step, her shoulders stiffening before she turned. Her brown eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Yes, sir?" she said, adjusting the bags in her grip. "Did I forget something?" Daniel stepped out onto the balcony, the city's hum fading behind him. He studied her, his tailored suit catching the last rays of sunlight. The bags didn't look heavy, but they were stuffed, their contents hidden by the opaque plastic. "What's in those?" he asked, his tone measured, his gaze locked on her face. Lila offered a small, hesitant smile. "Just some things I picked up at lunch. Groceries, for home." He didn't respond right away. His years in tech, building a cybersecurity firm from a single laptop to a multi-million-dollar enterprise, had taught him to spot inconsistencies. Lila's smile didn't reach her eyes. Her fingers tightened around the bag handles, a subtle tell. "You've been leaving early a lot lately," he said, stepping closer. "Always for your mother. You say she's sick?" Lila nodded quickly. Too quickly. "Yes, sir. I've told you before she's not been well. I'm doing my best." Daniel's jaw tightened. He remembered overhearing her on the phone the day before, speaking rapidly in Spanish outside the kitchen. He'd caught the word dinero, money, and the urgency in her tone. "I heard you yesterday," he said, his voice low. "You were talking about needing money. Urgent money." Her eyes flickered, a quick blink, her fingers gripping the bags harder. I don't know what you mean, sir." "I'm not asking, Lila," Daniel said, his tone sharpening just enough to cut through her deflection. "I'm telling you, something's going on." The space between them grew heavy, the city's noise a distant hum. Lila looked down at the pavement, then lifted her chin, her eyes steady now. "Sir, if you don't trust me, maybe you should find someone else to clean your house." And just like that, she turned and walked away, her sneakers scuffing softly against the sidewalk as she disappeared into the crowd. Daniel stood rooted, hands in his pockets, his jaw tight. The wind tugged at his tie, but he barely noticed Dot back inside the penthouse. The silence was deafening. The sleek furniture, the modern art on the walls, the view of Central Park, all of it felt hollow. Daniel poured himself a glass of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the light, but it didn't calm the churn in his chest. He stared out at the city, his mind racing. He'd built his life on control, on knowing every variable. After losing his parents in a car crash at 22, after friends and partners who'd used his wealth and vanished, Daniel had learned to trust no one. Money, he'd found, brought more enemies than peace. And now Lila, the quiet woman who scrubbed his floors and dusted his shelves, was hiding something. He didn't like mysteries. He needed answers that the night stretched on. Too quiet, too still. The penthouse, with its smart lights and automated systems, felt like a fortress, but Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, the soft glow of his laptop screen casting shadows across the room. The only sounds were the faint tick of a minimalist clock and the occasional siren wailing far below. He pulled up Lila's employee file, a digital document his assistant, Ethan Brooks, had compiled when she was hired. Lila Torres, 27, born in Honduras, raised in Miami, moved to New York 2 years ago. References checked, ID verified, background clean. She'd started working for him 8 months ago, recommended by a staffing agency. But now, as he scrolled through the details, he saw gaps. No mention of her evening routines, no explanation for her early departures, no record of what she did after leaving his penthouse. Too clean, he muttered, leaning back in his chair. Too simple. Memory flickered. Earlier that week, during a rainstorm, Lila had arrived soaked, her jacket dripping on the foyer rug. She'd hung it on the coat rack, and Daniel, passing by, had offered to move it to the dryer. As he reached into the pocket, his fingers brushed a crumpled receipt. He hadn't thought much of it then, but now it gnawed at him. He stood, crossed the penthouse to the coat rack by the kitchen, and reached into the same pocket. The receipt was still there, folded tightly. He smoothed it out under the kitchen's LED lights, squinting at the faded ink. A bank transfer slip, $2,000 sent to an account in Miami, under the name Lila Torres. His chest tightened. Her mother? Was she telling the truth? Or was this something else? He set the slip on the counter, his mind spiraling. In 2025, New York was a city of stark contrasts, billionaires in glass towers, immigrants scraping by, in crowded tenements. Lila lived in the Bronx, a world away from his Manhattan bubble. The city's wealth gap was wider than ever, splashed across news feeds. Articles about tech moguls hoarding fortunes while service workers like Lila struggled to afford rent. Daniel had seen the headlines but never felt them until now. He picked up his phone and opened WhatsApp, remembering the message he'd glimpsed on Lila's screen when she'd left it on the kitchen counter by mistake. A contact labeled Mama with a string of text in Spanish. Asterisk, necesitamos más para la próxima semana. El hospital no espera. He didn't speak Spanish fluently, but he knew enough. They needed money, and the hospital wasn't waiting. Daniel leaned against the counter, the receipt still in his hand. Part of him felt guilty for digging into her life like this. Lila had always been polite, never complained, always left the penthouse spotless. But another part, the part that had been lied to, used, betrayed, couldn't let it go. Was she in trouble? Was she hiding something darker? Or was she just what she seemed, a woman stretched thin, trying to survive in a city that chewed up? Dreams? Tomorrow, he'd ask her directly. But deep down, he already knew she wouldn't give him a straight answer. Lila was good at keeping secrets, quiet people often were. And the more Daniel tried to understand her, the more he realized she wasn't just a housekeeper. There was a story behind her eyes, a life he'd never bothered to see until now. The New York evening was alive with chaos, taxi horns blaring, street vendors calling out, the faint scent of roasted chestnuts mingling with exhaust. Daniel Harper sat in his sleek black Tesla SUV, parked discreetly half a block from his Manhattan penthouse. The tinted windows shielded him from the city's gaze, but his eyes were fixed on Lila Torres, who moved quickly down the sidewalk, her small frame weighed down by 2 plastic bags. Her steps were purposeful, her head slightly bowed against the October chill. She didn't take a cab, didn't hail an Uber. Instead, she boarded a yellow MTA bus bound for the Bronx, its brakes screeching as it pulled away. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd given Lila the evening off, citing her mother's hospital visit, but something about her story didn't sit right. The bank slip he'd found in her jacket, $2,000 sent to Lila Torres in Miami, gnawed at him. Was it for her mother's medical bills, as she claimed? Or something else? In a city where trust was a luxury he could no longer afford, Daniel needed to know. He started the engine, keeping the bus in sight, careful to stay a few cars back. The traffic lights seemed to stretch forever, red halos glowing in the dusk. The Bronx was a different world from Manhattan's polished towers. As the bus wound through narrow streets, past graffiti-streaked buildings and corner bodegas, Daniel felt the city's pulse shift, grittier, louder, more raw. The wealth gap of 2025 New York was stark, while Manhattan glittered with tech wealth and influencer culture. The Bronx bore the weight of rising rents and shrinking opportunities. News feeds buzzed with stories of immigrants and low-income workers pushed to the margins, their skills ignored in a system that demanded fluency and credentials. Daniel had skimmed those articles, but they'd never felt real until now. The bus stopped at a crowded intersection in Mott Haven, where faded shop signs and flickering streetlights framed the scene. Lila stepped off, her bag swinging lightly, and walked past a row of weathered buildings. Daniel parked across the street, lowering his seat to avoid notice. His eyes followed her to a small storefront with peeling paint and a cracked sign above the door. Asterisk BrightPath Community Center. Evening classes and food support asterisk. He squinted, the words barely legible in the dim light. Through the center's glass windows, the scene came alive. The room was small, its walls patched with mismatched paint, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow. Folding chairs were arranged in uneven rows, occupied by a mix of older men and women, some with notebooks, others just listening. At the front, standing by a chalkboard, was Lila, not the quiet housekeeper who faded into the background of his penthouse, but a woman with a gentle smile, her voice clear and steady. "Repeat after me," she said, pointing to the board. "How are you?" "I am fine." The group echoed her words, their accents thick but eager. A woman in a faded headscarf stumbled over "fine," and Lila knelt beside her, patiently guiding her through the syllables. "You're doing great, Mrs. Lopez," she said, her voice warm. Daniel leaned forward, his breath catching. Lila wasn't hiding a crime or a scam. She was teaching English to people who looked like they'd carried the weight of the world to get here. He watched, transfixed, as Lila moved around the room, correcting pronunciation, handing out pencils, laughing softly at a man's shy attempt to say hospital. The plastic bags sat open on a table, revealing their contents: loaves of bread, apples, bottled water. Lila unpacked them, distributing food to the students during a break. An elderly man with weathered hands took a sandwich, his eyes crinkling with gratitude. "Gracias, Lila," he said, and she squeezed his shoulder, her smile brighter than Daniel had ever seen in his penthouse. Something shifted in Daniel's chest, a pang he couldn't name. He'd spent years building walls after his parents' death, after business partners who'd smiled while siphoning his wealth. He'd learned to suspect everyone, to see motives behind every kind word. But this was no act. Lila wasn't stealing from him or hiding a double life. She was sacrificing, giving her time, her money, her energy to people who had nothing. The $2,000 transfer wasn't for her gain. It was for her mother, or maybe even for the center. The realization hit him like a punch, and with it came a wave of shame. The center's door swung open, and a woman in her 60s, Miss Clara Johnson, the coordinator, Daniel would later learn, stepped out, glancing suspiciously at his SUV. Her gray hair was pulled back, her eyes sharp. She muttered something to Lila, who looked toward the street but didn't see him. Daniel sank lower in his seat, his heart racing. He wasn't ready to be caught, not yet. He waited until Lila resumed teaching, then pulled out his phone. A quick search for BrightPath Community Center brought up a bare-bones website, the kind built on a free template. The About Us page was simple. Asterisk, we offer free evening English classes to low-income adults and immigrants in the Bronx. Many of our learners are former artisans, farmers, or professionals who never finished school. We believe in second chances. There were photos, blurry but unmistakable. Lila, smiling as she handed out notebooks. Lila, reading a children's book to a group of adults, their faces lit with focus. And a small note at the bottom, asterisk, we run on small donations and volunteer funds. Our rent is overdue, and we need support to keep our doors open. Asterisk. Daniel's thumb hovered over a donation link, a GoFundMe page with a modest goal of $10,000, barely halfway met. Comments from donors mentioned Lila by name, asterisk, Ms. Torres is a blessing to our community. He clicked out, his throat tight. The center was struggling, and Lila was pouring everything she had into it, her salary, her evenings, her heart. He drove back to Manhattan in silence, the city's lights blurring past. The penthouse felt colder when he returned, its sleek surfaces mocking his unease. He poured another bourbon but didn't drink it, staring instead at the bank slip on the counter. Lila wasn't a thief. She was something rarer, a giver in a city that took and took. But why hadn't she told him? Why hide this part of her life? The next morning, Lila arrived at 7 a.m. as always, her apron tied neatly, her movements precise. As she wiped down the kitchen island, Daniel watched her from the dining room, his coffee mug untouched. "Good morning, Lila," he said, his voice softer than usual. She turned, startled. "Good morning, sir. I'll be done here soon." "No." "Rush," he said, studying her. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed, but there was a quiet strength in the way she moved. He wanted to ask about the center, about the bags, about her mother, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he said, "How's your mother doing?" Lila paused, a dish towel in her hands. "She's stable, sir. Thank you for asking." Her voice was polite but guarded, her eyes avoiding his. He nodded, letting the moment pass. But as she turned back to her work, Daniel made a decision. He couldn't confront her, not yet. Not until he understood more. He called Ethan Brooks, his longtime assistant and closest confidant. "Ethan, I need you to look into something for me," he said, his voice low. "A place called BrightPath Community Center in the Bronx. Find out everything, how much they owe, how they operate, who's involved." Ethan's voice crackled through the phone, surprised. "Boss, you okay? This isn't your usual kind of project." Daniel exhaled. "I know. Just do it." The report came that evening, a PDF attachment in Daniel's inbox. BrightPath was on the brink, 2 months behind on rent, operating out of a borrowed storefront, a roof that leaked in 3 places. No steady sponsors, no government grants. Lila was listed as a lead volunteer unpaid. The center served 50 learners a week, mostly immigrants and low-income adults, teaching them basic English to navigate doctor visits, job interviews, or even just the subway. The report included a photo of Lila at a folding table, surrounded by smiling students. Her face lit with a joy Daniel had never seen in his penthouse. He leaned back in his chair, the bourbon still untouched. He'd followed her expecting to uncover a lie. Instead, he'd found a truth that made him question everything about her, about himself, about the walls he'd built to keep the world out. Lila wasn't just a housekeeper. She was a lifeline for people the city had forgotten. And Daniel, for the first time in years, felt the stirrings of something he'd long buried: admiration. The Manhattan penthouse gleamed under the morning light, its marble floors reflecting the soft glow of dawn creeping through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Daniel Harper sat at the kitchen island, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand, but his attention wasn't on the view of Central Park or the newsfeed scrolling on his tablet. It was on Lila Torres, who moved quietly across the room, wiping down countertops with the same steady rhythm she always did. But today, Daniel saw her differently, not as the invisible housekeeper who kept his world orderly, but as a woman, carrying a mission bigger than his own. The image of her at the BrightPath Community Center, teaching with patience and handing out bread to her students, lingered like a melody he couldn't shake since that night in the Bronx. Daniel had found himself lingering in the penthouse more often. No more late nights at his cybersecurity firm's Midtown office. No more weekend retreats to the Hamptons to escape the city's noise. He wanted to be here, around her. He caught himself watching the way she tucked a stray curl behind her ear, the way her lips moved slightly as she hummed a tune while watering the orchids. Lila was a puzzle, but not the kind he'd feared. She was a story he hadn't dared to read until now. "Lila," he said one morning, breaking the silence as she folded dish towels. She turned, surprised, her brown eyes meeting his. "You like ginger tea? I made some extra." She blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, thank you, sir. I'm okay." "It's Daniel," he said, offering a small smile as he slid a mug across the island. "And it's just tea. No strings attached." She hesitated, then took the mug, her fingers brushing the handle cautiously. "Okay, Daniel." The word felt foreign on her tongue, and they both chuckled at the awkwardness. She sat at the edge of a bar stool, sipping the tea, the steam curling around her face. For a moment, the penthouse didn't feel so empty. They started small conversations about the weather, the city, the way the subway always seemed to break down when it rained. But over the weeks, the talks grew deeper. One afternoon, as Lila arranged fresh lily in a dining room vase, Daniel leaned against the doorway. "You ever miss Honduras?" he asked, his voice soft. Lila paused, her hands still on the flowers. "Sometimes," she said. "The warmth, the way everyone knew each other. But New York, it's where I had to be. For my mom." Her voice dipped, and she looked away, focusing on the petals. Daniel nodded. He knew about her mother's illness from the bank slip, from the whispered phone calls he'd overheard. But he didn't push. Instead, he shared something of his own. "My parents died when I was 22, he said, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Car accident, coming back from a conference. They left me everything: money, this place, the company. But it's like they took the best parts of me with them." Lila's eyes softened. "I'm so sorry, Daniel." She paused, then added, "I think sometimes we lose people and we build walls to feel safe. But the walls just make the silence louder." He looked at her, really looked, and saw something he hadn't expected: understanding. She wasn't just a housekeeper, not just a volunteer at BrightPath. She was someone who knew loss, who carried it quietly, like he did. From that day, the penthouse became a space for these moments, shared tea, quiet confessions, a slow unraveling of the distance between them. But Daniel carried a secret of his own. That night in the Bronx had changed him, and he couldn't just watch from the shadows anymore. Late one evening, after Lila had left, he sat at his desk, the glow of his laptop illuminating the room. He opened the BrightPath GoFundMe page again. The donation bar stuck at $6,200 of its $10,000 goal. He thought of the center's leaking roof, the worn chairs, the hope in the students' eyes. Without hesitating, he typed in a figure, $500,000. He selected Anonymous and hit Submit. Then, through his assistant Ethan Brooks, he arranged a second transfer of $50,000 to a hospital in Miami, covering Lila Torres' outstanding medical bills for her heart surgery. No name, no message, just a note. Asterisk, for a second chance. Asterisk, he didn't tell Lila. He didn't want her to know. This wasn't about credit. It was about doing something that mattered, something he'd learned from watching her. But the secret weighed on him, especially as their conversations grew warmer, more open. One Tuesday morning, as Lila dusted the bookshelves, Daniel noticed a notebook peeking out of her bag. The cover was worn, the pages marked with sticky notes. "What's that?" he asked, curious. Lila glanced at the bag, her cheeks flushing. "It's nothing, just schoolwork." "School?" Daniel raised an eyebrow, leaning against the couch. "I didn't know you were studying." She sighed, setting down her duster. "I take evening classes at Bronx Community College. After my shifts at BrightPath, I'm working on my degree in social work." She hesitated, then pulled out the notebook and flipped it open to a title page. Asterisk, Invisible Talent. Why skilled? Immigrants are forced into survival jobs in urban America. Asterisk. Daniel read the title aloud, impressed. "This is serious stuff, Lila." She gave a shy smile. "It's personal. I've seen it too many times. People like my friend Rosa, who was a nurse in Guatemala, but cleans offices here because her credentials don't count. Or Mr. Alvarez, a mechanic in El Salvador, now pushing a cart in the market. They're not lazy. They're talented, but the system doesn't see them." Daniel nodded, his mind flashing to the news feeds he'd skimmed stories of immigrants stuck in low-wage jobs, their skills buried under language barriers and bureaucracy. In 2025, with anti-immigrant sentiment flaring in some corners of the city, their struggles were louder than ever. "You're trying to change that," he said. More a statement than a question. "I have to try," Lila said, her voice steady but soft. "I want to build programs that help people use what they already know, not start from nothing." He looked at her, struck by the fire in her eyes, the quiet determination that burned beneath her reserved exterior. She wasn't just teaching English at BrightPath. She was fighting for a world where people like her students weren't invisible. And for the first time, Daniel felt small in his own wealth, his own walls. But not everyone saw Lila the way he did. One afternoon, as Lila cleaned the guest bathroom, Daniel overheard a sharp voice from the hallway. It was Maria, another housekeeper who came in twice a week, hired through the same agency. "You think you're special, don't you?" Maria said, her tone laced with venom. "Always staying late chatting with Mr. Harper. You're just a cleaner, Lila. Don't get ideas above your place." Lila's response was calm but firm. "I'm not trying to be anything, Maria. I'm just doing my job." Daniel stepped into the hallway, his presence silencing Maria instantly. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his voice cool but pointed. Maria mumbled an apology and hurried off. But the encounter lingered in Daniel's mind. He'd seen the headlines, workplace tensions, prejudice against immigrants, the way class and status pitted people against each other. Maria's words weren't just jealousy. They were a symptom of a city, a country, where people like Lila were often dismissed or resented for daring to dream bigger. That evening, Daniel called Ethan again. "The BrightPath report," he said. "Anything new?" Ethan's voice was cautious. "They're still struggling, boss. The donation helped, but they need steady funding. Lila's listed as working 3 jobs, your place, BrightPath, and a weekend shift at a bodega." She's stretched thin. Daniel hung up, staring out at the city's glittering skyline. 3 jobs. He thought of his own life board meetings, private jets, a penthouse he barely used. And Lila, spending her evenings teaching, her weekends ringing up groceries, her small salary feeding others. He'd misjudged her completely, and the weight of that mistake settled in his chest. The next morning, Lila arrived with a tired smile, her eyes shadowed from another late night at BrightPath. Daniel watched her from the dining room, a plan forming. He couldn't stay on the sidelines anymore. He wanted to help, not just with money, but with something real, something lasting. But he also knew Lila's pride, her quiet strength. She wouldn't accept help easily, and he wasn't sure how to offer it without breaking the fragile trust growing between them. As Lila set a vase of fresh lily on the table, Daniel spoke. "Lila, you ever think about doing more with your ideas? Like turning your thesis into something bigger?" She looked at him, surprised. "Bigger how?" "Programs, maybe. Funding. A way to reach more people like your students." She smiled, but it was tinged with doubt. "That takes money, Daniel, and connections. I'm just me." He wanted to tell her about the donation, about the hospital bill, about how he saw her, really saw her. But instead he said, "You're more than you think, Lila. Trust me." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded, turning back to her work. But the air between them felt different now, charged with something unspoken. Daniel didn't know it yet, but he was falling not just for Lila, but for the world she was trying to build, a world he'd never thought to notice until she showed him it was there. The Manhattan penthouse was quieter than usual, the hum of the city muffled by thick glass windows. Lila Torres moved through the living room, her hands steady as she dusted the sleek bookshelves, but her mind was elsewhere. The past few weeks had shifted something between her and Daniel Harper. Their conversations, once limited to small talk about the weather or misplaced keys, had grown into shared confessions over ginger tea, moments where the walls between them seemed to thin. Daniel's questions about her life, her dreams, her work at the BrightPath Community Center felt genuine, not like the polite curiosity of an employer. But with that closeness came a new unease, a fear Lila couldn't name. She was a housekeeper, an immigrant, a woman who'd fought for every inch of her place in New York. Getting too close to someone like Daniel, wealthy, powerful, untouchable, felt like stepping onto unsteady ground. Daniel, meanwhile, couldn't stop thinking about Lila's thesis, her quiet fire as she spoke about invisible immigrants, her evenings spent teaching at BrightPath. He'd seen the center's struggles through Ethan Brooks's report. Overdue rent, a leaking roof, no steady funding. His anonymous $500,000 donation had kept the doors open, bought new textbooks, and fixed the roof. But it wasn't enough. Lila was pouring her life into that place, her salary from his penthouse, her weekends at a bodega, her nights volunteering. He wanted to give her more, not just money, but a platform to make the change she dreamed of. He ran a small foundation, the Harper Fund, focused on education and youth development. It was modest, mostly a tax write-off, but it could be more. With Lila, it could be transformative. One crisp November afternoon, as Lila arranged fresh tulips in a dining room vase, Daniel walked in, holding a manila folder. His casual sweater and jeans felt out of place in the formal space, but his expression was serious, purposeful. "Lila," he said, his voice soft but steady, "can we talk for a minute?" She paused, wiping her hands on her apron, and nodded, her stomach tightening. She sat at the edge of the dining table, her hands folded in her lap. Daniel sat across from her, sliding the folder forward. "I've been thinking about your thesis," he said. "Your ideas about helping immigrants, giving them a chance to use their skills. They're powerful." Lila's eyes flickered with surprise. "Thank you, Daniel. But it's just a paper. I'm still figuring it out." "It's more than a paper," he said, leaning forward. "It's a vision. And I want to help you make it real." He opened the folder, revealing a neatly typed document. "I run a foundation, the Harper Fund. We focus on education, community, outreach. I want to expand it, and I want you to lead that expansion. As Community Outreach Director, full-time, with a salary that can cover your mom's care, your tuition, and still let you support BrightPath." Lila's breath caught. She stared at the document, the words blurring as her heart raced. A job, not cleaning houses, not ringing up groceries, but leading, building, creating. It was everything she dreamed of. But something inside her recoiled. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a leap into a world she didn't know, a world where people like Daniel made the rules. She thought of her students at BrightPath. Rosa, the former nurse. Mr. Alvarez, the mechanic turned cart pusher. They trusted her because she was one of them, because she stood shoulder to shoulder with them under that leaking roof. Would they still see her that way if she stepped into an office, a title, a paycheck funded by a man like Daniel? I don't know what to say," she stammered, her fingers trembling as she touched the folder. "Say yes," Daniel said, his voice warm, encouraging. "You've earned this, Lila. You're already changing lives. This would just give you more tools to do it." She looked up, meeting his eyes, and saw something she hadn't expected: hope, not just for her, but for what they could do together. But the hope was tangled with fear. "I'm grateful, Daniel," she said, her voice tight. "Really, but I'm afraid." He tilted his head, confused. "Afraid of what?" "Of leaving what I know," she said, her words spilling out. "BrightPath isn't just a job. It's family. We built it together, me, Miss Clara, the students. If I take this, I'm not there every night, teaching, unpacking food. I'm not on the front lines anymore. What if they think I've abandoned them?" Daniel nodded slowly, his expression softening. "I get that. You're afraid of stepping away from the day-to-day, of losing that connection." "It's not just that," Lila said, her voice cracking. "I've spent my life being seen as just a help. People like me, we don't get offers like this, unless there's a catch. Taking this job feels like choosing money over purpose. Like I'm leaving my people behind." Daniel leaned forward, his voice earnest. "It's not one or the other, Lila. It's both. With this role, you could help more people create programs, secure funding, make a real impact. You'd still be you, just with more reach." Lila bit her lip, her mind torn. One voice whispered that this was her chance, the culmination of her thesis, her nights at BrightPath, her dreams for her mother and her community. Another voice screamed that she was risking everything: her identity, her roots, the trust of those who saw her as one of them. She thought of Maria, the other housekeeper, whose sharp words still stung. Asterisk, don't get ideas above your place. In 2025 New York, where anti-immigrant rhetoric flared on social media and community centers like BrightPath struggled against rising costs, Lila knew that stepping up could mean stepping away from the very people she fought for. "Can I think about it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Daniel said, his smile gentle but tinged with worry. "Take your time." But time didn't make it easier. Over the next week, the warmth that had grown between them cooled. Where there had been shared tea and laughter, now there was polite distance. "Good morning, Daniel," Lila would say, her eyes fixed on her work. "Good morning, Lila," he'd reply, lingering by the kitchen door but finding no words to bridge the gap. The penthouse, once a space of connection, felt vast and empty again. Daniel felt the shift in his bones. He'd opened the door, and maybe he pushed too hard. Lila felt it too, her heart heavy with indecision. She wanted to say yes, to believe. In Daniel's vision, but the fear of losing herself was stronger. One evening, Lila saw a post on BrightPath's Instagram, a photo of her teaching, captioned, "Asterisk, thanks to Ms. Torres, we're still here. Help us keep going." The comments were full of gratitude, but one stood out, anonymous and cutting. Asterisk, she's probably just in it for herself. People like her always are. It wasn't true, but it echoed Maria's words, the doubts in her own heart. The city's tensions class divides. Whispers of outsiders taking too much seemed to follow her everywhere. On a rainy Friday afternoon, Lila knocked on the door of Daniel's study, an envelope in her hand. He looked up from his laptop, his heart sinking at the sight of her serious expression. "Lila," he said, standing. "Everything okay?" She took a deep breath, her voice steady but soft. "I came to give my notice. 2 weeks." Daniel's throat went dry. "You're leaving?" She nodded, her eyes fixed on the envelope. "Yes, I want to focus on BrightPath, finish my thesis. It's where I belong." He swallowed hard, searching her face. "Is this about the offer?" "I didn't mean to." "No," she interrupted, her voice firm but kind. "It's not just that. You've been good to me, Daniel. You believed in me, saw me in a way most people don't. But I need to do this on my own terms. I need to know it's me building this, not someone else's ladder." He nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling in. "I understand," he said, though every part of him wanted to argue, to ask her to stay. "Thank you, Lila, for everything." She gave a tight smile, her eyes glistening. "That means more than you know." The next 2 weeks were a quiet torture. Daniel, who'd spent years keeping people at arm's length, now found himself memorizing the small details of Lila's presence, the soft hum of her songs as she cleaned, the way she tied her scarf when she vacuumed, the faint scent of citrus from her cleaning supplies. He wanted to tell her she didn't have to go, that he'd support her dreams without strings, but he stayed silent. He'd learned long ago that you couldn't hold on to someone who needed to walk their own path. On her last day, Daniel handed her a manila envelope. Inside were recommendation letters, each one glowing, personal, heartfelt. Lila's eyes widened as she read them. "These are beautiful," she said, her voice thick. "They're true," Daniel replied, his smile faint but genuine. "Keep in touch, Lila." "Please." "I will," she said, clutching the envelope. They stood in the foyer, two people on opposite sides of a goodbye, the city's hum a distant reminder of the world beyond. As Lila walked out, her sneakers soft against the marble, Daniel felt the penthouse grow colder, emptier, as if she'd taken the warmth with her. The BrightPath Community Center glowed under the soft twinkle of string lights, a rare warmth cutting through the chill of a November evening in the Bronx. The small storefront, once marked by peeling paint and a cracked sign, had been transformed. For the annual fundraising gala, white tablecloths draped over folding tables, adorned with paper flowers crafted by students. Laughter and chatter filled the air, a mix of English, Spanish, and Creole, as guests mingled local volunteers, immigrant learners, and a few hesitant donors from Manhattan. The gala was a beacon of hope in 2025 New York, where community centers like BrightPath fought to survive amid rising rents and dwindling grants. Social media buzzed with posts about the event, tagged #BrightPathGala, showcasing the center's mission to empower those the city often overlooked. Lila Torres moved through the crowd, her simple black dress a contrast to the vibrant energy around her. She checked details, ensuring the donated catering trays were full, adjusting a microphone for the evening speeches. Her heart raced, not just from the event's demands, but from the weight of the past weeks. 3 months had passed since she'd left Daniel Harper's penthouse, since she'd handed him her notice and walked away from his job offer. The decision had felt right at the time, a way to protect her roots, her purpose at BrightPath. But the emptiness lingered his kind eyes, their shared tea, the way he'd seen her when no one else had. She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the night ahead. Across the room, Miss Clara Johnson, the center's coordinator, rushed toward Lila, her gray hair bouncing in a neat bun. "Lila, you won't believe this," she said, waving a printed bank statement. $500,000. An anonymous donation hit our account this morning. And there's more. The hospital in Miami called. Your mom's surgery bill, paid in full. No name, just a note. For a second chance. Lila froze, her hands trembling. 500,000? And Mama's bill? Her voice was a whisper, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her mother, Elena, had been battling heart issues. For years, the hospital bill's a constant weight. Lila had scraped together payments from her 3 jobs, but it was never enough. Now this? She covered her mouth, tears prickling. Who would? Clara grinned, her eyes sparkling. Someone who believes in us, child. Someone who sees you. The gala began, the room buzzing with anticipation. Lila stood at the back, her mind spinning. The donation had saved BrightPath new computers, a fixed roof, stipends for volunteer teachers. Her mother's surgery, fully funded, meant Elena was recovering, her voice strong again on their last call. But the anonymity gnawed at Lila, who could give so much and ask for nothing. As the MC took the stage, the crowd hushed. Tonight, we honor a woman who's kept this center alive, he said. Miss Lila Torres, our Volunteer of the Year. The room erupted in applause, students cheering, some waving handmade signs. Lila walked to the stage, her steps unsteady, clutching the crystal plaque handed to her. The lights warmed her skin, but her heart pounded. She leaned into the microphone, her voice soft but clear. Thank you all, she said. I used to think no one saw me, just a housekeeper, just a volunteer. But standing here, I see all of you, my students, my family. This award isn't mine, it's ours. The crowd roared, and Lila's eyes scanned the room, landing on a figure near the back. Daniel Harper, in a dark gray suit, stood quietly, his hands in his pockets, his gaze locked on hers. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen him since she'd left, and now, here he was, clapping with a quiet pride that made her chest ache. After her speech, the gala slowed, children dozing on chairs, elders laughing over plates of rice and beans. Lila stood near the entrance, the plaque heavy in her hands, her mind drifting to Daniel. She'd felt his presence all night, a silent anchor in the crowd. As she adjusted a tablecloth, he approached, his steps tentative. Congratulations, Lila, he said, his voice low warm. You deserve every bit of this. She smiled, her lips trembling. Thank you for coming, Daniel. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken history. They stood in silence, the gala's hum fading into the background. Then Lila took a breath, her voice barely audible. There's something I've wanted to say to someone, but I didn't know who. She held the plaque tighter. My mom's surgery, it was paid for 3 months ago. An anonymous donor. And the same week, BrightPath got its biggest donation ever. Also anonymous. Her voice broke slightly. I don't know who did it, but if I could meet them, I'd tell them they saved my life. Daniel looked down, his hands still in his pockets, his jaw tight. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with truth. He met her eyes, his voice soft, but steady. Lila, it was me. She blinked, stunned. What? He stepped closer, his voice shaking now. I followed you that night when you left early. I thought you were hiding something, maybe stealing. I was wrong." He swallowed hard. "I saw you at BrightPath, teaching, giving food, smiling in a way I'd never seen. I saw how much you give, how much you carry, and I couldn't just watch anymore. I paid for your mom's surgery, for the center, because you changed me." Lila stared at him, the truth settling like pieces of a puzzle. Her hands trembled around the plaque, tears welling. "You did all that and didn't tell me?" "I didn't want credit," Daniel said, his voice raw. "I wanted to help. I wanted to feel like I was part of something that mattered, like you do every day." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "But I couldn't keep standing in the charsing back, pretending I don't care. Because I do, Lila. I care so much it scares me." Silence fell, heavy but honest. Lila's mind raced. She'd spent years guarding herself, expecting every offer to come with strings, every kindness to hide an agenda. In 2025, with social media amplifying distrust and communities like hers facing scrutiny, she'd learned to rely only on herself. But Daniel's words, his actions, were different. They weren't charity, they were something deeper, something she was afraid to name. "I don't know how to feel," she whispered, shaking her head. "You paid for my mom, saved BrightPath, offered me a job, and I didn't know. I thought I was building this on my own." "You were," Daniel said firmly. "Everything you've done, BrightPath, your students, your thesis, it's all you. I saw you climbing alone, and I couldn't let you fall." Lila bit her lip, tears spilling now. "I've been used before, Daniel. People who help, only when it suits them. Forgive me if I'm scared this is a trap." His eyes darkened with emotion. "I'm not here to control you or take credit. I did it because you showed me what it means to live for others. You made my world less empty. That's not pity, Lila. That's—" He hesitated, then said it. "That's love." The word hung in the air, raw and unguarded. Lila looked at him, searching for a lie, but found only honesty, only ache. She turned away for a moment, clutching the plaque to her chest. "I was afraid," she said quietly. "Afraid that letting you help would mean losing myself. And now?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She turned back, her eyes wet but steady. "Now I'm afraid of what happens if I don't let you in." For the first time since that night he followed her bus, Daniel smiled, a real, hopeful smile. "Then let's figure it out together." The gala's music played softly in the background, a gentle rhythm of hope. Lila and Daniel stood face to face, the distance between them closing, not just in space, but in heart. The lights outside BrightPath glowed like stars, and for the first time, neither of them was hiding. The BrightPath Community Center no longer looked like the crumbling storefront Daniel Harper had first seen months ago. On a warm June afternoon in 2025, it stood transformed, its walls painted a soft white, adorned with vibrant murals of books, faces and alphabets crafted by the students themselves. Fairy lights strung between rows of folding chairs twinkled under the Bronx sun, and children darted through the crowd, clutching paper flowers and ribbons. The air was thick with laughter, the scent of Ara's Campalo from a local caterer, and the soft hum of a borrowed keyboard playing gospel tunes. This was no ordinary day. It was the wedding of Daniel Harper and Lila Torres, held in the heart of the place where their story began. Lila stood at the back of the hall, radiant in a simple lace dress, its soft yellow hue a nod to her grandmother's wedding gown tailored to fit her small frame. Her mother, Lila Torres, adjusted the veil with trembling fingers, her eyes shining with pride. Elena, now fully recovered from her heart surgery thanks to Daniel's anonymous donation, whispered, "You've made it, Mia." Lila touched her mother's hand, smiling. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Mama." The guests were a tapestry of lives touched by Lila's kindness and Daniel's quiet transformation. Tech executives from Daniel's cybersecurity firm mingled awkwardly with market vendors who'd learned to read at BrightPath. Elderly students, like Mr. Samuel Reed, wore their finest, their faces beaming with pride. Rosa, the former nurse from Guatemala, brought a cooler of homemade tamales, while children waved hand-drawn signs reading "Felicidades, Ms. Lila." No chandeliers or flashy arches, just a wooden platform draped in white fabric and babies. Breath, a testament to the community's love. Daniel stood at the front, his black suit crisp, his smile so wide it hurt. When Lila walked down the makeshift aisle, the crowd stood, some clapping, others wiping tears. Daniel forgot to breathe, his heart swelling as she reached him. They laughed through their tears, the moment raw and real. The pastor kept the ceremony short, letting their vows carry the weight. Lila spoke first, her voice steady. "I thought I had to carry everything alone, Daniel. But you showed me love isn't a weight. It's a hand to hold. I don't just marry you today. I build with you. I believe with you." Daniel's voice trembled as he responded. "You taught me that wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in the lives we touch. I promise to be your teammate, your protector, your partner in purpose, always." When the pastor said, "You may kiss your bride," the crowd erupted, and a center once on the brink of closing felt reborn, alive with hope. A year later, Daniel and Lila hadn't slowed down. They'd launched the Harper Torres Foundation, named for their shared roots and new beginnings, with a mission to provide literacy, job training, and social services to underserved communities across the U.S. Daniel handled logistics, securing partnerships with tech firms and nonprofits, while Lila led with her heart-training volunteer teachers, speaking in rural towns, sitting with elders in crowded clinics. Their headquarters, a modest two-story building on the edge of the Bronx, buzzed with books, computers, and laughter. But the heart of their work remained at BrightPath, where new teachers, trained by Lila, carried on their classes. One evening, Daniel and Lila returned to the center, hand in hand. The paint was fresh, the windows open wide, children's voices echoing from a new classroom. At the back, Daniel pushed open a door to a small room, the one where he'd once watched Lila teach in secret. Above the whiteboard was a gold plaque, "The Lila Torres Learning Room, where every voice matters." Lila froze, her fingers tracing the letters. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "You do," Daniel said, kissing her forehead. "You always did." She turned to him, tears in her eyes. "My only regret is not telling you sooner how much I loved you." He smiled, his voice soft. "I knew, Lila. I felt it long before you said it." As the sun set, painting the sky in golden pink, they stood by their car, bags packed for a honeymoon in Puerto Rico, a place neither had been but both had dreamed of. Lila glanced back at BrightPath, the plaque, the place where it all began. "Ready for the next chapter?" Daniel asked as she took his hand, her smile deep and sure. "Born ready." This story is more than a romance between a billionaire and a housekeeper. It's a testament to the power of quiet love, patient trust, and the courage to see beyond walls of class, status, or fear. Lila Torres showed us that purpose isn't measured by wealth but by the lives we lived. Daniel Harper reminded us that even the hardest hearts can soften when shown what truly matters. In 2025, as America grapples with division, economic gaps, immigrant struggles, and distrust amplified by social media, their story is a beacon. It teaches us that every voice matters, that second chances are real, and that love can bridge divides if we dare to let it in. The Harper Torres Foundation stands as their legacy, but the lesson is ours. See the invisible, hear the silenced, love the overlooked. Share this story with someone who believes in hope, in redemption, in the power of community. And if it moved you, even a little, subscribe to Legacy Stories on YouTube or your favorite platform. Join us for more tales of hearts transformed, lives rebuilt, and love that dares to change the world. Let's keep telling stories that matter.